Yeah, so to Nelson, I'd like to redo the conversation we did earlier in terms of Nama-Rupa and in terms of letting go and the relationship of letting go to the idea of a self, like I am letting go, that finally mind is starting to see that actually the letting go is a process by itself, and that I cannot let myself go, basically, to put it really simple. And you made some really good remarks that resonated well a couple of days ago. And so could we redo that conversation, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll start from the beginning in the sense that you start off the practice with right effort. So first you get your view straight in terms of understanding what is right view and wrong view. And that is also a process of effort. There is some kind of an effort there. And so when we talk about right effort, we say that the right effort is to change the wrong view to right view, to change the wrong intention to right intention, to change the wrong speech to right speech, wrong action to right action, wrong livelihood to right livelihood, wrong mindfulness to right mindfulness, and ultimately wrong collectedness to right collectedness. So right effort is really at the heart of the Noble Eightfold Path in that sense. It is the encapsulation of how one goes from where they are in suffering to the cessation of suffering. So initially, when you start the process, you're using, as we say, the 6 R's, which are intertwined with right effort. You're using the process of recognizing when there's an unwholesome state, and then preventing it by having recognized it, it stops it. You let go of that and abandon it. So you take your attention away from it. So this is the other thing to understand. The right effort also is a recognition and experience of the Four Noble Truths. When you recognize that there is present an unwholesome state or a hindrance or whatever it might be, you have stopped that flow of that hindrance, and you understand the first noble truth of dukkha in the form of that hindrance or unwholesome state. When you see that your attention to it feeds it, that is the samudaya, that is the cause of that dukkha. So when you release your attention, bringing it back to mind and body or mind itself, then you are letting go of the second noble truth of the cause of suffering. When you relax, so when you release, you bring it back, you relax, you are tranquilizing the formations, and that is bringing you to the experience of Nirodha in that moment, the third noble truth. And then you collect your mind, you smile and collect your mind back to the object, and you repeat, and that is the fulfillment of the Eightfold Path in itself. And so you are fulfilling, exercising, cultivating the fourth noble truth of Magga, which is the Eightfold Path. So having understood this in the beginning, a person, a being will do this in order to, first and foremost, weaken the formations rooted in any unwholesome states, weaken the formation rooted in wrong understanding or wrong view and so on, and strengthen the formations through that practice that would lead then to the right collectedness and then ultimately the insight. Now, this is a self-perpetuating wheel in the sense that, or self-propelling in the sense that as you start to notice it, you then let go naturally. So what one is saying here is, in the noticing of the unwholesome state, the natural consequence of the mind is to let it go after having done the right effort. But now the thing here is the right effort itself, just like in the beginning, the jhanas and the ayatanas are seen as me, myself, and mine. One now has to eradicate that. One has to let go of that. One has let go. This is why it is a gradual practice. First, one lets go of the wrong beliefs. Let's go of the wrong view, comes to the right view at stream entry, and therefore has destroyed doubt. destroyed self view or personality view, and destroyed the attachment to rites and rituals with the understanding that they will lead to nibbana. So having let go of that, then you weaken the fetter of craving, sensual craving, and the fetter of aversion at Sakadagami. Having destroyed that at Anagami, now you have to deal with the conceit. Now, it's not to say that for the Sotapanna and the Sakadagami, they cannot do this themselves. It will take a little more time, or it might not. It all depends upon their skill level in terms of how they have effectively done the practice in terms of the sila, samadhi, and panya. The panya here, the insight here, is to understand that in a collected mind, when the observation happens, in that in itself, of seeing how this is dukkha, in seeing how this is causing suffering, in the seeing of that, one lets go. So the natural progression of that is this. Number one sees the impermanent nature of conditioned reality. So one can see the impermanence of the body, the impermanence of feelings, the impermanence of perception, the impermanence of intentions. And you could see that the body, the cause of the body, or the cause of the development of the body, is food. Take away food and the body withers away. So you understand that first. And it's a very basic foundational thing to see. But then with regards to feeling, perception, and intention, or feeling, perception, and formations, one sees that is dependent upon contact. If you cease contact, and it's as easy as ceasing the attention towards whatever that experience is. In other words, if the window is open and you hear a lot of sound, you close the window, you have negated that sound, you have eradicated that sound. There's no longer any contact with that sound. And so the attention is no longer on the sound because there's no way the sound is able to meet with the ears. So seeing this, one lets go of the idea of feeling as being permanent and sees it as impermanent. Seeing that perception is dependent upon feeling, seeing that it is intertwined with feeling, seeing that it arises dependent upon contact, one lets that go. One lets go of the idea of impermanence of perception. Likewise with formations. Formations arise based on the contact that arises. So any kind of contact with the eye, ears, nose, tongue, body, or mind will generate some kind of inkling of an intention. Seeing the intention as being impersonal because it's dependent upon causes and conditions, one lets go of that. So the abandonment of these is dependent upon seeing the impermanent nature. Likewise with consciousness. Now consciousness or awareness, or however you want to call it, is dependent upon different factors. It's dependent upon it's dependent upon contact, because upon the contact with the eye and, let's say, the tree, there is the consciousness of the tree. There's an eye consciousness that arises. But before that, there's an interplay between the consciousness and the Nama-Rupa, which we'll get at shortly. But to understand this progressive step, the process is that once you understand it is impermanent, the mind makes a shift on its own. There's no effort to be made in that sense. There's only the observation. Within the process of observing this as being impermanent, the natural consequence of that is that the mind abandons it and sees it as dukkha. The natural consequence of seeing the dukkha of these five aggregates, or the six sense bases, the mind naturally sees that it is impersonal. Seeing that it is impersonal leads to the mind having this disenchantment and dispassion for anything that is arising and passing away. Through this dispassion, there is a natural cessation of suffering. So when there is this awareness of something being impermanent, it is not I becoming aware of the impermanence. It is just a seeing and observing This arising and passing away, this is the Nama-Rupa. Nama-Rupa means the contact, feeling, perception, intention, attention, and the body itself. Seeing the arising and passing away of contact, of feeling, of perception, and so on, of Nama-Rupa, the mind has the tendencies to say that this is mine, this is me, this I am. But in the observing of that, there is just an awareness. There's a superimposition of the I am on the awareness of the arising and passing away. That is why at the sixth level, when one sees infinite consciousness, one sees the flickering of lights or something in the visual consciousness, or listens to flickering in the ear, and so on and so forth. The question that naturally arises in people's mind is, who is the person, or who is that which is seeing the arising and passing away of this? Now, here comes the subtlety of this. The Nama-Rupa, which is the arising and passing away, is dependent upon the awareness of its arising and passing away. And the awareness of that is dependent upon the arising and passing away. In other words, when there is one arising, there is an awareness of that arising. When there is a passing away, there is an awareness of that passing away. But the awareness itself is not I. It is tied to that experience itself. So the subtlest point, the subtlest understanding of the interplay between Nama-Rupa and consciousness is that there needs to be an awareness to be able to understand that there is an arising and passing away. But that awareness itself is not I. It arose tied to and dependent upon one arising and one passing away, and so on and so forth.
So then the I am experiencing the cessation is actually the consciousness which arose due to the contact, and the contact by itself is dependent on Nama-Rupa. And if you take away the attention, it basically means there is dispassion. And because of the dispassion, there's no feeding of the energy. Then
yes.
Nama-Rupa ceases, and the awareness ceases, and then Nirodha arises automatically.
Right.
So
in other words...
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm just thinking about the cause and consequence here in terms of the conditioning and the unconditioning. Because then the awareness of Nama-Rupa, the awareness of the arising and passing away. If mind is seeing this is suffering, and mind is seeing that the cause of the suffering is actually the attention that mind is putting onto it, and on top of that, the personalization. If the attention is taken away, the energy is taken away, Nama-Rupa fades away, and because Nama-Rupa fades away, consciousness fades away, and if consciousness fades away, there is basically the automatic arising of Nirodha, or the complete cessation of suffering. Is that correct?
Yes, what you are basically talking about, and this is what one touched upon last time, is there's dependent origination. The arising of this causes the arising of that, and so on. Here, the reversal process is dependent cessation. Taking away one leads to the taking away of the other. And so what you are seeing is, in taking away the attention, or understanding that the attention is no longer on the suffering aspect, but the attention is on the cessation aspect. In other words, in seeing the arising of the visual consciousness of seeing the tree, such a mind then becomes aware of that. That awareness is now tied to that experience. But taking the attention away from that now, then the consciousness dependent upon that attention fades away. And instead, the attention is on the cessation of that. Then that leads to, dependent upon that, the cessation of personalizing, the cessation of whatever else. Ultimately, the contact, the feeling, the perception itself ceases in Nama-Rupa. Having ceased, because there's an interdependent nature of consciousness and Nama-Rupa, with the cessation of Nama-Rupa, there is the cessation of consciousness. But likewise, with the cessation of consciousness, there's also the cessation of Nama-Rupa, in the sense that there's no more awareness of the experience of Nama-Rupa.
And then I wrote down here, right effort requires a self in terms of applying the right effort, in terms of I am intending to let go. And then we discussed the fact that actually right effort is, I just use my own words here, is training the mind, which basically allows the mind to let go by itself, which basically right effort is just training the mind to let go, which basically means that if one has abandoned all the feathers, there's no requirement for right effort, because mind is trained in such a way that it's an quote unquote automatic response of the mind, and there's no other way.
Yes, yes. So to really get deep into that, in other words, initially there is some sense of self, of a person doing the 6R process, of a person observing. So there's an observer, there is a person who is aware of it, there's a person who lets go, or is the relaxer, let's say. There is a person who is a smiler in that sense, and a returner back to the object, and so on. But in the mind which has let go of all fetters, first and foremost, there is no requirement to do any of that process, because there is no more arising of any kind of unwholesome state. But the key here for people who want to destroy the fetters is to understand this from the perspective of the one who has destroyed all 10 fetters. And this is that the mind of the Arahant, the consciousness of the Arahant, is non-reflective. That comes back to that statement in Pali of the Vijnanam Anidasanam, which means the consciousness that is non-manifestive, non-illustrated, or as one puts it, non-reflective, using the analogy of the mirror. The mirror itself is awareness. Nama-Rupa is that which is reflected in the mirror. When you take away the mirror, you don't have any recognition or any awareness of Nama-Rupa. But take away the Nama-Rupa, and there is no mirror either, because the concept of the mirror is dependent upon saying, I am experiencing this. It is me who is experiencing this. It is me who is observing. It is me who is reflecting. When there is no conceit, when there is no I am, then that mirror itself is non-reflective. It doesn't reflect any sense of this is mine, this is me, this I am, but it just understands. That's it. There is just the understanding. There is just the awareness. There is just the perception. So going back to that statement, in the seeing, there's only the seen. This is what it means. So for such a mind, if you take into account that as someone, or anyone generally speaking, who wants to destroy the fetters, they do it with this understanding that if you see that the observation that is happening is dependent upon an intention, but that intention is dependent upon other causes and conditions. The problem is when there is the I am attached to it, then there is the I am observing. But in the process of observing, the natural consequence of the observing, meaning the mindfulness itself, prevents the arising of an unwholesome state. So at the level of contact and feeling, there can be, especially at feeling, there can be the underlying tendency towards sensual craving, the underlying tendency towards aversion, the underlying tendency towards ignorance, and so on and so forth. The only reason such underlying tendencies will arise is when there's a lack of mindfulness, a lack of awareness, a lack of attention to the experience with the lens of the three characteristics. So in other words, when such a mind experiences or has the experience of feeling, there's an automatic understanding that this feeling is conditioned, therefore this feeling is impermanent, and whatever is impermanent is liable to change and therefore not worth holding on to and not considering to be self. It's not like what one has just said is the verbal processing that's going on in such a mind. It's just automatic. It's just intuitive, just an understanding. That understanding is awareness itself. In the awareness of that, there is no arising. There is the non-arising of any kind of anusayas, any kind of underlying tendencies. So the awareness itself leads to just seeing it as it is. But what one can take from this, as someone who has not destroyed all the fetters, is to see that in the awareness itself, if there is awareness, if there is right mindfulness, it is a natural consequence of that mindfulness to not hold on to that as me, myself, or I. So the way one can use this as a litmus test to see if one is correctly mindful, one is applying right mindfulness, is to see that, okay, there is the awareness, but there's nothing else beyond that awareness.
So then mental proliferation is dependent on attention to the contact, which basically generates new formations, new Nama-Rupa, new consciousness, and then basically you start the endless cycle.
Yes, and that attention is the intent. It's the attention that has the sense of I am experiencing this, I am feeling this. So that is what is known as ayoniso manasikara, wrong attention. But the attention rooted in reality, that reality is the reality of conditioned reality as being impermanent, as being liable to change and therefore not holding on to because of this dukkha, and therefore not being liable to, or rather not being considered to be as self. That attention rooted in reality, it takes effort in the beginning. Of course, it takes effort, but eventually, when you're utilizing mindfulness itself, there is an understanding and no more arising of craving, no more arising of clinging, and no more arising of being. This craving, it starts from the underlying tendency. So if one just sees and just sees, meaning seeing without saying, I've seen this, or seeing without saying that here is a painful feeling that is happening to me. As soon as that happens, there can be the arising of an underlying tendency towards aversion. From there, then there is full-blown craving in that form of aversion, full-blown aversion at that link. And then that's where the process of mental proliferation then continues the samsara at that level and draws it back to the formations and so on and so forth. So in other words, the mindfulness makes sure that there is right attention, that attention rooted in reality. So the awareness of it, without adding to it that I'm experiencing this, in the awareness itself, there is, so look at it this way. If you look at it from the concept of the 7 factors of enlightenment or 7 factors of awakening, that mindfulness is awareness, that mindfulness is sati, the remembrance of being here with the mind in whatever is happening. That leads naturally to the discernment of what is happening. That discernment doesn't need to be applied with an I am, doesn't need to be applied with extra effort of an I am doing this. That discernment, that investigation of states is simple as seeing that this is impermanent. Seeing, in the seeing itself, there is the abandoning. So that is why, going back to that statement, that in the seeing of the impermanence is the seeing of dukkha. In the seeing of the dukkha is the seeing of not self, and that naturally leads to abandoning that as me, myself, or mine. So the discernment leads, therefore, to the experience of effort or energy or effort. Then that leads to joy. That joy brings back collectedness or tranquility and then collectedness. And then from that is the equanimity, which sees things as they really are. It's always happening in many cycles without your effort, without any personal effort there. So if you were to summarize this in one statement, it would be this. So before I say that, there's always this emphasis on observing and 6R. That's all you're doing. In this practice, you're observing and 6R. There comes a point, this is the summary of it. There comes a point when in the observing itself, the natural consequence of that observing is the 6R process without an effort to do it. And that only happens when there is a recognition that there is an arising of an unwholesome state, a recognition that there is a lack of mindfulness. But if there's only observing, then there is only observing, nothing else.
That's